So next up is Sarah Whitehead, PhD student here at Leeds Beckett and sports scientist with Leeds Rhinos under-19s, talking about the match demands of youth rugby league players.
Thanks, Rob. I'm Sarah. I'm the Academy Sports Scientist at Rhinos, as Rob just mentioned. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to talk. I'm going to be developing a little bit on from what Dale talked about and looking at more specifically Youth Elite Rugby League. So just a little bit about what we're going to cover. So we're going to look at the current research in the differences between the levels of play of the match demands, and then look more specifically at those peak running demands and starting filling in the gaps with our current research. So a little bit of background first on the professional playing pathway in rugby league. So players first get recruited for professional clubs at the scholarship level at the under-16 age group. And then from this, or from other sources, they then get selected to play in the academy, where they sign their first professional contract and play in an academy competition against other clubs' academies. Now, the primary focus of this development pathway is to prepare players to play Super League. So, knowing that, we want to know the differences between the levels of play so we can best prepare them. Now, what we do know is that there are differences in the physical qualities between the levels, and that as they progress through, they get stronger, heavier, and faster. But what we're not really sure about is the differences in the match play running demands. And this is really important because we want to prepare players for match play at their own respective competition, but also for the next level up. So looking at current research, there's a systematic review and meta-analysis by Hauser and colleagues from 2016, which has looked at all the research at the time on rugby league match play, so from anything from junior, school, carnival level up to NRL and Super League. And they carried out meta-analysis and categorised them into elite, sub-elite and junior level. And they found that the elite and sub-elite had greater whole match total distance demands compared to the junior. But as Dale mentioned, this doesn't really take into account the playing time. So when this is taken into account and looking at relative distance, slightly less differences, but there's still elite and junior being greater than the elite and sub-elite being greater than the junior. But looking at these whole game demands does provide a very blunt measure of the intensity, and by preparing players for those intensities, we likely underprepare them for match play. So this is when we want to start looking at the peak demands, to look at what the worst case scenario periods of running that the players will encounter. So this has been done at the senior level with Delaney and colleagues doing a couple of studies on NRL match play, and Dan, who has got a study under review at the moment with Super League. And the ranges there being across the forward and back positional groups. But what we don't know is the levels below. So we want to start filling in these gaps so we can best progress players through the pathway. So our first study, trying to start filling in these gaps, was looking at the youth level, so under 16s. And we compared within the age group, but between the levels, so scholarship, so the majority of their games for the 2017 season compared to all the international youth games. Now, due to the small number of games that they played, we only split them by forwards and backs. We wanted to compare the peak relative distance between these levels. So we exported the raw velocity trace from the GPS and looked at short, so 10 seconds and 30 seconds, and then longer durations of 1 up to 10 minutes. What we found was that there are differences between the levels, but they do appear position dependent. So looking at the backs, for the short duration, so at 10 seconds, very likely greater running demands at the club level, so the clear circles compared to the international. And then similarly at 60 seconds, with no real differences at 5 and 10 minutes. However, when we look at the forwards, at the 30 seconds, it's the other way around, so it's greater at the international level compared to the club level. And then again at the 1, 5 and 10 minute durations, same pattern occurs. So the international forwards encounter greater peak running demands at these durations compared to the club. Now the practical applications of this perhaps tell us that for forwards preparing for international test matches, they might need to be exposed to higher intensities during training as they don't get the exposure at the scholarship matches. Whereas for the backs, because they encounter the higher running demands at scholarship, they can perhaps focus on different performance factors. So then moving on to academy level, so the under-19s, we wanted to overcome a really common limitation of match demands research, with it being the use of only one club. So we recruited other clubs within the Academy Championship to have 9 teams involved, which meant we had a bigger sample size, 149 players and 391 match observations, which meant we could really go more position specific. So we wanted to look at the differences between the positional groups, and again, looking at peak relative distance with a moving average of shorter and longer durations. So we did find that there were differences in the positional group. So this graph here shows the standardized differences between the positions, with the symbols being the positions compared to the other positions along the bottom. So if you focus here, looking at the full-backs, compared to all of the positions, so outside backs, halves, hookers, middle forwards and back rows, there are greater peak running demands than those positions. And this was actually the same at 10 seconds and 1, 5, 10 minutes. Whereas when we look at the outside backs, so the clear circles, they are greater at this duration, so 30 seconds, and similarly with 10 minutes. But then when we look at it from the longer duration, so the 10 minutes, you can see that they then go underneath and they become lower running demands compared to the forward groups. Now, all these differences could be a combination between the contextual factors, so the technical, tactical demands, but all the differences in physical qualities between the positions. But what it does tell us is that the position-specific nature of the peak running demands, and that we need to be specific when prescribing velocity-based running intensities from this. Another key finding from the study was that the academy level running demands and with the youth level, they appear similar intensities to the senior. So as you can see, when we started to fill in these gaps here, there doesn't really appear to be any real difference between the levels and across the competitions in those peak running demands. But it is, however, important to consider that, linking back to one of the first slides, that we know that they're heavier at that higher level. So it could be that for them to run at those intensities, they may require greater fitness levels considering their greater body mass. Another key component that we are missing is the collisions. So we haven't taken into account the collisions in this research, purely looking at the running demands. And that is actually our next step, comparing the peak running with the collisions between the levels, which will be quite interesting. But I know Dan's going to be talking a bit about how you can look at this next. And so yeah, so that's me done. I do have all the averages and standard deviations of the academy level, if anybody would like those, and I can send them across and not put them up on the screen for you yet. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.